Okay, I want to introduce my dear friend and amazing colleague, Eleta Wright. Eleta and I met in social work school, and Eleta was a year ahead of me, but light years ahead of me in many other ways. She has been a fierce social justice activist. She works with houseless youth. She has a consulting and training business called M.I.N.E Consulting. And I will, as Eleta's talking, I will put in the chat the email address for that. I'm sorry, I tried to have that in the waiting room, but I'm going to turn it over to Eleta, and you can say all the other amazing things that that you want us to know about you. Thank you so much for coming all the way here to Portland from Burien, which is south of Seattle, and thank you for doing this. You were willing to come all the way down to Portland where we weren't allowed to travel. So everybody, let's do a round of applause for Eleta Wright.
Thank you.
Hey.
Very glad to be here with you all. Well, thank you very much. So,
practice that.
Raising your hands. So how many of you volunteered to come here tonight? Please raise your hands. If you hit that, then we will be able to see. Well, Grace, I'm going to also say Grace is the one who's in control. We are dubbing her goddess, and she can turn off those raise hand icons.
I don't remember how to do it.
Okay.
Oh dear. Well, we've got two people know how to raise their hands. So if somebody...
you just click their name in the participant.
Yeah, but I'm just concerned because other people aren't able to raise their hands.
Then chat to Grace.
Chat to me. Yes.
Well, you can chat to everyone. But
or to everyone.
Well, if you chat to Grace.
Yeah.
All right. So welcome. As Grace and Rachel have said, this is your group's first time doing this. This is also my first time doing this. And because of this current period of time and the things with which we're dealing, Grace and I learned how to do this in the last 2 weeks. So I reiterate, please bear with us as we figure things out as we go. Be stunned with us as we are brilliantly doing the things that we think we've learned. Okay? I'm going to go to similar to what Grace did, where you can share the screen. So I'll be working on things on screen with you. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to actually, I'm going to be presenting for the next 30 minutes, and I will time it because I have a tendency to overshare. I love to talk, and some of you might also. And we wanted to leave at least 30 minutes for you to ask questions and for us to do some kind of interaction, action, and discussion. We're also we think we're going to attempt something called Breakout Rooms, where you'll get to discuss in small groups, much as you would in person, where you would do dyads and triads, to give everybody a chance to be heard. As I go along, I will talk about the origins of the tools that I use, so that if you have to replicate or find information, and it will be in the video, you can do so. Are there any questions? Yes, that was. So one of the things that as we start, and this has been on my mind today, is recognizing that we are on indigenous land. I just saw an article about a tribe that has 300 acres that is going to be declared no longer a tribe. And I am, as usual, horrified that we as a country get to usurp sovereign rights of people in such an outlandish way and continue colonization and genocide, because by doing that, taking away sovereign rights and land, you totally attempt to kill a whole community, which has been the history in the United States. I live on Duwamish land here on the Salish Seas, and so I am thankful to be a part of this and recognize that I have privilege just by virtue of being a citizen of of the United States. And this land there are so many things there are ways in which we have not been thoughtful about the land and the people. And somebody once told me more than 30 years ago that if you look at the way that we treat the land, you will see how we treat its people. I think that's something for us to keep in mind, because for many of us, for many people, touching earth, touching land is a healing. I think it's important for us to remember that. If you could tell me who your land is. I did not look up what Portland, and I've heard it before, but not Grace or Rachel.
Sorry, I'm trying to get back to...
We're in Multnomah County, and I know the Multnomah tribe was one of the main tribes on this land, one of the many.
Right.
There was also the Tillicum tribe, for whom the Tillicum Bridge is named. And I know there are plenty more that I'm drawing a blank.
I see Chinook and Safton, Sahapton. Thank you. And I can say some of the tribes around here are the Tulalip, the Muckleshoot, the Swinomish. There are many, many tribes. And I someday will have them all before me. I actually have a map that has them all, but I'm not looking at that. So thank you. So one of the things, I'm going to move on into my presentation because I'm now down to 25 minutes. I want to do a brief overview of how I view human beings, all human beings in general. And we'll start with this slide and share. I believe that we as human beings are born good, intelligent, fully capable of taking on as much love as possible, curious, and zealous. We are born this way. Every human being. The things that happen to us over time determine a lot of our behaviors, but they are not who we are inherently. And I call this a model of the inherent human being. And this comes out of a community that I've been involved with for quite a while called reevaluation counseling. People have different feelings about that, but I love this basic set of principles. This is where we start. In the actual, and I'm not a PowerPoint person, so you're not going to get this version. It will be on the presentation. But in this, who we are, how we are born, who we are as young people, who we are as pre-young people before we're born, we have come with all of this. These lines represent the things and influences on our lives, the people, the institutions. And if I were there with you, we would write them in. Things like, and you can at this point unmute yourselves. What are some people or things that have influence on this human being, on each of us as human beings? Popcorn. So, for instance, parents have an impact.
Trauma.
Again, please.
Trauma.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Schools.
Mm-hmm.
Our parents.
Whether or not we have enough to eat, a safe place, shelter.
Yeah.
Identity.
Multiple, yes. Systems and institutions.
Mm-hmm. Churches.
Churches, yes. Oh, Danielle, are you raising your hand?
I said trauma, but culture, education,
yes. Hospitals, social service agencies.
Mm-hmm.
Stories.
Extended family. All of these things come in, and we come in with the best of intention. Not only do we make mistakes unintentionally and unawarely, but we make some mistakes that we don't know we made that leave us with trauma. Okay? I'm flying through this. I usually I can spend an hour or two just doing that and having a conversation around that. What ends up happening is if we are all born that way, then how do we turn out with the oppressions, the isms, like racism, sexism, and other oppressions? Some would say it's learned. I'm suggesting that it is learned. It's a part of it because people, I do not believe, and we don't know, but I do not believe that people are born racist or born sexist or born classist. Do not believe that. I could be incorrect. So what I want to do really quickly is talk about, because what we see and the things that we see that are oppressive or the oppressions on people are not how or who they intended to be. That's my basic belief. It's who they've become, okay? And based on where we stand in relationship to privilege determines oftentimes how we exercise that or how privilege impacts us or the lack of privilege impacts us. So in this matrix, and many of you might know this, so we're going to go through this pretty quickly. There are people who are targeted in our society, and there are people who are not targeted. When we're talking about oppression, I'm talking about, in this context, institutionalized oppression, okay? It is not just individual acts of power plus privilege. It is inculcated, it's a part of the fabric of society that we have learned to accept or to delegate, to actually not delegate, but to actually act in certain manners. In our target group, I started off, and I use the language of people of the global majority. We've been talked of as people who are minorities, in particular in the United States. The language of the United States always also talks about third world nations. Actually, people of color are the majority of the world. The majority of the world are not European heritage. More than 60% of the world are people of color. So I'm in a community that uses the language of people of the global majority. We're not the institutional and power majority, but we are the global majority. There's some things that are empowering about that, and if we stepped into that, it would be interesting. So those are the people who are targeted. People who are not targeted in our culture and in our world at this time, in particular, this part of the world.
So I'm wondering, can folks hear me? So while we're waiting for Eleta to come back on, thinking back to that last graph that she had of the global, I think it was majority, yes, and then the next one was that was the targeted, and then the next one was the privileged, and then what was the last column? Does anybody remember?
I'm back. I apologize.
Oh, there she is. Okay.
I got kicked off.
We don't see you.
You will in a moment.
All righty.
Hi, Cindy.
Hello, Eleta. Welcome back. I was holding class while you were gone. We're going to talk about your graph in the previous slide.
Perfect. So I'm going to go back to that. So people who are targeted. So going back to this, the people who are targets of oppression, of another group of people who are targeted by oppression. Again?
You're asking who?
Yeah. Yes.
In America, African-American people.
Including that in people of the global majority. So I'm going to give women. That people of the global majority includes people who are African American, people who are of Asian descent, people of Latinx descent. So women, and the non-target would be men. In a binary world, we're going to do some stuff around LGBTQ, and the oppression would be sexism. Okay, that's how this goes. So I will do children and adults. And that would be adultism. Neurodivergent, yes. Neurotypical.
Can you explain what those terms mean? I know that came up in a recent other meeting I was in, and not everyone knew what those terms meant. So can you just clarify those terms?
So people that we consider normal mentally versus people that we consider not normal. And we have a lot, those are in particular for people who have cognitive issues, but it is a form of mental health oppression. That helps I see it. What you can do, you can end up filling this up with class, working, and poor, working poor, and in this group would be owning class, people that own the means of production. in that working and working poor are a lot of people that we sometimes don't think of as working class, but anybody who works for a living and can live from paycheck to paycheck, no matter how big that paycheck. So that's that matrix. Moving on, and this is my piece around what holds all of this in place. I'm going to show you two forms of carousel. One, I just learned this word with Wikipedia, manual powered carousels. How many of us remember playing on what they called manual powered carousels? They're still around.
Yeah.
The thing about a carousel is, one thing that's important about it is that it goes around and around and around and around. It does not go anywhere. Carousels, I grew up with a mom who adored carousels and loved every chance that we could get to go on one. No matter how ornate they are, they still only go around and around and around. What I do is I take those oppressions and I put them on the different animals on the carousel. You all are very blessed that I'm not drawing this. But so you put racism, sexism, classism, mental health oppression, ageism, fat oppression. You put them all on the carousel and they go around and around. And oftentimes people get targeted for only one at any given moment. We talk about intersectionality. I don't know myself to be an intersectional person. I'm just a person that carries a number of oppressions. So I am an African-American woman who is large, who's fat. Those could be at any moment places where I would get targeted by multiple oppressions. I use the carousel to talk about this and talk about oppression in terms of what are the things that hold that oppression in place. As you can see at the top here, without this, the carousel would not work. It would not. For those of us who grew up in the age of and watched Mary Poppins, the horses would go off into who knows where, bouncing along a path. But that's only in fantasy. It needs to be held in place for it to keep working. When I first started doing this and drawing this, I drew it with a crank, and somebody said to me, Eleta, have you ever seen a carousel with a crank? That was before we knew the words, the thing that we played on, the manual powered carousels were out there. We just played on them. But I changed it to an electrical cord. That electrical cord is what powers the oppression. As I said in the beginning, people are born good, intelligent, curious, zealous. Adultism is how we end up training people to be oppressive, unintentionally, often completely unintentionally and unawarely. But it is where we learn who we can talk to, who we cannot talk to, what to like about ourselves, what to like about other people. We learn to judge, even though we're taught in the same breath not to judge. We learn to judge and discreetly make relationships with the right people. So boys are taught to stay separate from girls, and in so doing are taught to be a way that they're not inherent. Boys are no more, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just think that when you're explaining things, it's so much richer for us to get to see you talk, if that's okay.
Yes. Oh, I bounced out of spotlight is what you're saying.
Well, no, it was on the screen share while you were giving this rich explanation. So I hope it's okay that I
That's why you are in control. You have the power. We're learning. So we learned how to be in relationship to other people. And in so doing, have learned and taken on habits that have hurt other people. We learned that in our families of origin. That's where it begins. It begins for everybody up until I'm not even going to say recently. It begins before birth in what colors we will put children in. It's a form of oppression that we are starting early.
Good. Come on.
So, and we determine what toys we will get, what colors we will paint their rooms, what they will be allowed to do, and we've already planned ahead to who they may associate with on the basis of gender alone. We will tolerate different behaviors on the basis of gender. We will stigmatize and ascribe mental health attribution on the basis of gender, because up until probably maybe the 80s, because I was still in school in the 80s for my undergrad, we were still ascribing a certain behavior and locking up young boys and men, all young boys and men, in particular young boys and men of color, in particular African heritage. But we were doing that on the basis of who they were when they were young. What holds us in place? So you have the power, which is electricity. Adultism is how we train people into this oppression and this merry-go-round. And as you remember at the top of the merry-go-round, this is what the things that hold it in place. In our society, I suggest that there are a couple of things that hold it in place. Our legal/justice system, some would call injustice system, and our mental health system. The way they're set up now is if you act outside of the norms, whatever has been suggested behaviors, if you can't hold down a job, if you can't be still in a classroom, if you can't learn like everybody else does, if you can't follow the rules, you can be subject to being put in one of those two systems. Once in those systems, you will then continually be targeted. What keeps the rest of us in place is we do not want to be like those people. So we in turn hold our whole society accountable to keeping oppressive modes and methods in place in order to save people from being in those systems. I would like to say that people in those systems are really deeply connected to who they are inherently and can remember the inherent worth, the inherent dignity, the inherent truth about who the people are that they are working with and what we call serving. Part of why we set those systems up is to attribute less than status to. One of the ways in which we maintain control in our society at this time has been with the use of drugs to keep people in line or to keep us feeling as individuals like we can make it in the world. In my questioning and questing, I ask, what would the world be like if our attention and time were instead spent on being present with, caring for, and thinking about people instead of medicating or trying to make them fit into a certain mold? That's my 30 minutes. I'd like to offer the space back to the group to ask questions, to take part, to have discussion among yourselves. Before we do that, Grace, I don't know how many people are on right now because we have 20. If people would be willing, most of the people here tonight people that know each other? No? Okay. That could be interesting too. I still let's do breakout rooms. Okay.
It was great. I really enjoyed that. And I've never been a part of a group with that kind of technology. It was really, really cool to check in with Emily. That was fun. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I always like to have the different types of interactions, like listening to the lecture and then interacting in partners or groups. So it just adds a depth. Yeah.
I really appreciated it too. We were part of the group of 3, so we were a little crunched. So I felt like I wasn't able to fully hear out the other person. So that felt unfortunate, but so also very cool to be in this technology. And I have to do a training in this format, so y'all are helping guide me already. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Grace.
Yeah, I was also in the 3-person group, and I think everyone had good points, but it did feel a little rushed, and it also felt like there's just so much to say about it. It's hard to distill it into a few points.
Thank you, Rachel.
Do people want to shift into sharing their point that they want to bring to the group?
Please, Jack, you'll need to unmute yourself if you want to join.
A clarifying question. Are we distilling one point for the whole group or one takeaway for each
Well, you know what? Let's just, if you can do it crisply, let's do, if you would like to do 1 point takeaway from your own thing.
I was very intrigued and informed with the idea that adultism is one of the, if not the most important, which I don't know, but is a key pillar that holds us all together. I find that fascinating, thinking of the educational system and our nuclear parenting family style. It's just really something to chew on.
Thank you, Cindy.
My initial reaction, which shocked me, was that I wanted to throw a monkey wrench into the electrical system of the merry-go-round. But after discussion, what I came away with was an understanding of how much pressure normative dominant culture puts on me to where we have anger and frustration. So
thank you.
Yeah, I was saying there's also often a hierarchy within oppressed groups of like who's more like the dominant culture. Mm-hmm. Like I'm thinking of a play I saw years ago about like the hierarchy between like Jewish immigrants who are from Germany and were more assimilated versus the Jewish immigrants who were from, the old country and more Eastern Europe who were not as assimilated. Or you hear about that with like colorism, like that lighter skinned people are often given more privilege, or with people who are neurodivergent, maybe people who can, quote unquote, pass as normal, might have more privilege. So even within oppressed groups, there can be more privilege based on like how close you are to the more dominant group.
I got the impression that in order to get things done, I had to really rigidly control myself. I have ADHD, and I'm going to go, and things attract me all over the place, and it's hard to get something coherently produced and taken care of. So that there's that strain, and I've never learned any other way to operate. And when I have quantitative or organized stuff to do. So that struck me in my conversation with Susanna as being kind of like her struggle with normative things. But in other words, there are ostensible reasons and justifications for having these controls on us in order for us to operate effectively, or particularly with others. And I was searching for how the hell do we get out of this, But I'm reminded of all the times I'm in groups with people, and some people will be very encouraging and upbeat, and so when we have a conflict or something, we'll talk about it, and so we'll listen to each other, and then we'll kind of work something out. And it's like we don't just follow a plan to begin with. We take the effort to work at looking at it. Might stumble along the way, but that's a more forgiving and creative and healthier way to do it. It might mean that we don't run our meetings real efficiently, like machines.
Thank you. Thank you, Taff.
You were taking notes, Aleta?
Yes, I am. Okay. Any other feedback, thoughts,
takeaways
that you would like to bring up?
Hey,
Hey, yes, I can.
I was just enjoying your carousel metaphor, because that's the one part that I hadn't heard of this, and what was occurring to me was that it seemed like the unpowered, the hand-powered carousel could also serve as a metaphor. I imagined, people running to catch up with it and inadvertently pushing, or pushing others off to try to get on it and making it go round. And so the mill of everybody being motivated to end up pushing it.
Right. Well, thank you, Ananda. That was one of my thoughts too.
This is Danielle. I really appreciated your statistic about how people of color are actually people of the global majority and the reminder of how language creates reality. And I really loved the reading you offered in your lessons, especially around how you talked about the justice system, and you reframed how some people call it an injustice system. And it just was a reminder about how even the way in which we identify ourselves and whatnot, it is a reinforcement, and this collective reinforcement of these existing power dynamics. And I think you did that really succinctly in a short amount of time, and I really appreciated those reaffirmations.
Thank you, Danielle. I'm going to ask for one more round. Just and I have a couple of points that I want to put back in that I forgot, and to address some of the things that were said, if I may.
So are you asking for one more share from this?
Yes. If there's anybody else, please, this is the time. All right.
And Eleta, I want to make sure that you give ample time for the tool that we're going to get to take away with us.
Yes. Well, you've used it, and this is where I'm going to give a little bit more information.
Okay.
I gave you a couple of tools, but I forgot one piece of one of the tools. So in the listening and being listened to, I was with somebody who understood and knew what the tool was that I was using. And one of the things that's important about that, being listened to, you only got a minute here. And in life, in family, no matter where you are, just an opportunity to be listened to is a complete, almost opposite of how somebody, I'm giving feedback. So if you mute yourselves, that would help it. I don't know where it's coming from. That helped right there. So if you had the opportunity to be listened to early on when you felt different or felt unfairly treated or were in fact mistreated, it would have made a difference. In current times as adults, we can never get back what we lost. Yeah, outside of what we call a therapeutic or a therapy, no, I'm going to use the word outside of therapy, we seldom really get listened to. The tool that I offered from the reevaluation counseling community is one where you get to be listened to. The other piece that goes with it is that you may feel like you need to do things like that are natural, but you've learned to control. We, as a society, have all learned to control behaviors, to not impinge upon other people's space, to not make other people feel uncomfortable physically or mentally or socially. We have social distancing now, but we actually, I'm reminded of this young human being who always talked about, this is my bubble. Do not get in my bubble. And would train people around them to keep people out of their bubble. This is mine. You may not cross this. One of the other things that we've learned to do in society also is to fight for airtime. We want to be heard. We have something, everybody has something to say. That's one of the things I like about the tool Liberating Structures, the 1, 2, 3, 4, all, is that everybody has a chance to be still so that they can hear their mind. Not everybody has an instant answer, but in our society, certain people are privileged to be able to spontaneously speak wherever they are, extemporaneously or planned, whatever, they are able to do so whenever they want. Certain groups of people have more access to that privilege than others and take up that space. Another thing that many of us have learned to do is to prepare what we're going to say in response to whatever's being said to us in that moment. Not a real form of listening. It's often about, oh, I can relate to that, or that's just like something I know, or I refute that. That's not true. Like, I disagree. But to just listen as if the person and what they're saying is valid, important, and clearly about them with no judgment can make, especially if you have longer than a minute. We've seen it in as short as 3 minutes. I've had people do up to half an hour, telling their life stories or talking about themselves in certain ways. And I'm not a therapist. have no intentions in that direction, but just being able to talk without being interrupted, without being judged, can make a person relax to the point that they might do what they would normally do, which is yawn and stretch. They might sweat. They might fidget. We would call it fidgeting, but it's not fidgeting. It's moving because that's what they need to do. And there would be no holding those back. People would get to do that. Go ahead. Grace, you're muted.
Your sound is getting a little muffled.
Oh, okay. Okay. Keep me apprised.
Okay.
So each of us would do, I used to do a lot of domestic violence and sexual assault trainings in front of groups, but also working with people. And I always talked about, tried to remember to talk about, take care of yourself. Some people, when they start talking about hard subjects like that, will instantly fall asleep. It hasn't to do with they're bored or I'm not a good presenter. It has to do with it connects possibly with something in their life that they lived, experienced, or that they saw, and it was too much, took them over, some of us have that experience when we watch scary movies. Some people, when they're coming up against things that are serious or hard, will laugh uncontrollably and have to apologize to people for being inappropriate. In these times of listening, this tool is really important because people get to do what they need to do. They get to do what they need to do with only one stipulation. You are not allowed to physically harm another person. And I limit it to the physical in many ways because what we say, we don't know what we say that might not intersect with what somebody talked about being in and out of favor and the potential experiences that we bring to any moment. We don't know what we might say that may not touch something in somebody in a way that we would think is completely benign. And for them, it's a trigger. So I draw the line at physical, especially with new people. Okay. All of those forms of your natural responses. It's like if you drop a bowling ball on your foot, a natural response, yes, is to be startled, to feel pain. Depending on how you've been socialized, you might swear or not, gender role socialization being what it is. If you are male, how that sometimes affects being the gender role socialization is you're not allowed to acknowledge the pain. You are, however, allowed to brush it off like nothing happened, when in fact your foot might be broken. So there's all these different ways. They're natural responses. In my RC community, they're called discharge. It's like taking in water. This is my analogy. They would not necessarily thank me for this. You take in water, you're going to let out water. It's a natural process. We've learned, however, in society to stop that natural process. If we don't stop that natural process, that's what can end up leading us into, in particular, the mental health system. And making us survivors. If we rage, I like that example. There are reasons why we rage. There are reasons why people rage. If people were allowed to do that with people just taking care, it would make a big difference. That's an understatement. I remember learning from a Native American community around sexual assault and their community, and this community does not want to lose its people. So I asked, what do you do? Because I was coming in from an outside agency. We had proscriptions about what they should be doing. And I said, what did your people do historically when there was a perpetrator in your midst? And the response was, we knew who that person was. So we never left the people that could have been their targets with them by themselves. We always made sure that there were children and adults. There were always adults watching. We do not let go of our people. There would be people watching that person, and there would be people watching the people that might be the targets. But you get to have them all. It's a different way of thinking about things.
Wow.
Our mental health system does not allow for currently. So I wanted to talk about this. Oh, somebody else described perfectly the extreme pressure the dominant culture has on a person. But Rachel, I think it was you who talked about what happens inside our own communities. That's internalized oppression. And I think it's important to think and talk about. A lot of that has to do with keeping people safe. The histories of many of our people was about if anybody in your community acted out, you could bring down, you could crumble your community. I'm thinking about the Trail of Tears. I'm thinking about the enslavement of African heritage people. I'm thinking about the Holocaust. I'm thinking about Chinese people in this, men in particular, who were not allowed to have their women be here. There are so many examples of where stepping outside of what the norms were would bring down either the legal system or mental health system because you got out of line. And you learn these things really quickly as children. That's where the adultism piece. And you oftentimes we have not historically until recently talked about our similarities. One of the pieces I want to go back to on that matrix is that all of us have been in the position of having been oppressed. Sociologically, we're taught that what has been done to us, we will do to others. My suggestion is what has been done to us, we may unintentionally do to others, and what we will label it as, the rest of society will label it as bad, as mentally ill, as there's a lot of things that we will label it. I like, Jack, you're talking about the ostensible good reasons. There are reasons why we have mechanisms of control. We need workers, for one thing. We need people to keep on producing. So we need people that can follow. So there's all of these things go into what keeps us in place. I loved your when I saw the manual carousel. That was my thought. My thought ran to, like, I remember being flung off, like hanging on and screaming, and people not hearing. There are ways in which we do cause harm, and we do. There's so many pieces here. There are so many pieces here. All of these are things with which all of us are faced at any time or another that can cause anxiety, terror, depression. They can cause all of those things to show up. In our society, impacts of oppression can cause all of those things to show up. Because we have made it so key that we all be normal, we do things to set people aside, separate them, medicate them, adjudicate them. We do things to keep those people in their places, but also make sure that we stay in place, because we see what happened in any of those groups of people who are oppressed. We watch what happens, whether it's a Black person watching extrajudicial killings, whether it's the current uprising in Jewish oppression in the United States that has far surpassed up until recently, in many ways, oppression against people of the global majority. As we're watching things with COVID-19, all of those things are about, they're training us to stay in our place. That carousel for me is really important, because I like your question, Jack, then what do we do? And that's another whole conversation, and it's an ongoing conversation. The one piece I want to leave with is we have multiple generations of history and trauma that we carry in our bodies. All of us have been at some point conquered historically. We carry a lot of things in our bodies. What we're doing in this last maybe 20, your group is 10 years old, but say 20 to 30 years, is trying to undo 50 to 100 to 150 generations of hurt. That's not to make it hopeless, but it's to say, have some perspective on where we are. We're doing well, even though the systems suck. We're new at this. We're new at actually attributing to all human beings their inherent humanity. We're new at holding and withholding judgment. I have hopes, but as I told my now adult human being that I raised, it will be like 6 or 7 generations away. We are that far from change. On her day of birth, I said, I promise to withhold your need by 10 years for therapy than I needed. I'm not saying I didn't need therapy all those years. I'm just going to hopefully cause less harm, 10 years less harm for the need for therapy. It's impossible. The impacts of our individual and collective humanity's experience of oppression and the internalization of oppression. Everybody that has ever oppressed is hurt by the oppression, stays conforming because of that top of that carousel. There's much more here, and I hope you all get to delve into that.
So, Eleta, are you saying that the main tool you're leaving us with is this knowing the radical power of offering listening?
Yes, Thank you. That's a perfect summary.
But there was a second tool. What's the second tool?
The other tool was the liberating structures tool of everybody in any opportunity, especially where you hold privilege. Pay attention. How are you taking up space? If you know yourself to be one that's reticent, how do you get yourself to move forward? That exercise of 1, 2, 4, all in any size group that's larger than like 4 works, because the 1 minute you get to just be with yourself instead of having to rush to the 4. And then you do one-on-ones, and then you do your 4s, groups of 4, and then you can do a share out where you take 4 minutes with those 4 people. So that's an important tool. And all of the liberating structures, a lot of them, that's the foundation on which other pieces of the structure are built. And finally, that matrix. Find yourself on the matrix. Go back and find out your history, your people's history of how sexism has impacted you, of how ableism, how temporary able-bodiedness has impacted you. There are so many opportunities. Those are all 3 tools that I use on an almost daily basis in relationship with myself and to the people I meet. But listening. It's free. Any questions? Any other thoughts or feedback?
I just tried to unmute everybody. I don't know if it worked.
Clapping.
Well, I'd like to say thank you for giving me such an uninterrupted time and attention.
Good.
Thank you.
I'm hopeful.
Thank you.
Our gatherings always end up with a lot of participation. So I suspect that we have 20 minutes. We'll just do like a couple minutes at the end to close up. But I suspect that if we give it just a moment, people's responses will bubble up.
Also, you may have said this, Eleta, but I think it's really important to understand, and maybe oppression is not the word, but the wounding it takes, and at one point we're all oppressors, but the wounding it takes to live in that place where oppression is like the way of life, I think it's really important to recognize and have compassion, which I often forget, because that is needed for our healing and their healing as well.
Thank you.
Cindy, do you mean as the oppressor, like to live in a role where you're...
Well, first of all, to acknowledge that, and Eleta did say this, that we all are oppressors at some time in our life, whether we're the parent, the whatever. But then there's for instance, we say that 1% whose much of their life and energy is about oppression. That is also oppressive to them.
Yes.
Their humanity. As it may look, and I guess it is worse to be the oppressed, but there is a horrible harm that's being done. And to kind of, when we can step back from the whip and realize the person that's casting the whip, deeply wounded and being oppressed.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cindy. Reiterating. Yes. I see your hand is raised.
This is actually, I've been eavesdropping on this video chat, and early on in your talk, you mentioned a paradigm of therapy that I didn't recognize the name of, and I was wondering if I could get that again.
Well, it's actually reevaluation counseling communities, and it is not therapy. It is actually a people committed to undoing hurts by listening and being listened to.
Gotcha.
Okay. Reevaluation counseling.
Thank you.
It's headquartered here in Seattle.
Great.
Good to hear from you.
Likewise.
Grace, do we know where people are listening in from?
People chatted in the beginning, but for some reason of how they found out, but for some reason it disappeared. So some people said physically where they were, but people might want to offer, just kind of throw out where you're listening from.
Social distancing is bringing people together.
Yeah.
physical distancing is bringing people together socially.
I wanted to offer something that doesn't have anything directly to do with the oppression, and it's actually a commentary I had with someone who I just met today on the Zoom. I would like to, can I throw that out? Or is there other things people want to say? I've been talking a lot. I'm sorry. I'll be quiet.
I don't know about everybody else, but now I'm really curious what Cindy was going to say.
Please go ahead, Cindy.
Yeah, I want to hear too.
Well, it's just, there is some belief that in ancient times we were able to communicate across land and water just as beings, right? And as we came more into this like human and separation, isolation, we separated, and so we had to develop these kind of telecommunications to communicate across the waves and the oceans and stuff. And possibly this kind of communication, as we realize we can communicate like this, that we may be returning and redeveloping those powers of the ancient times where, if you believe that, that we were able to communicate across the lands and that. So it's going in a spiral circle back into our some innate abilities, human.
Can I offer a book for people that's about people who are still doing that? Some of you may have heard of it. It's a book entitled Mutant, Down Under, and it's about the Aborigine people in New Zealand. Australia, thank you.
Yeah.
What, Down Under?
Mutant, M-U-T-A-N-T.
Okay.
And it was somebody from outside of the community that was given permission to write the book, but talked in particular about that communication of which you just spoke, Cindy.
And I read that book a long time ago and I loved it. And there are people from that community that it was written about that said, who is that person who gave you permission? And contest that it was given and contest that not everything was accurate, that a lot wasn't accurate.
Good to know. I never questioned who gave permission, but I can see where that could be useful. So for people's information, we do have more time. And with permission, we have made it available to leave this space open. My understanding is that after your meetings, as often happens in meetings, the meetings happen, people talk some, and then after the meeting, people really talk.
Yeah.
We've even started addressing that in staff meetings. Can y'all have the real talk here with us right now? But so the room will be open until late tonight.
Well, I'll just say, since I'm the official host, you're saying that I can leave?
You'd have to leave. Somebody else is supposed to shut it down.
Okay. So yeah, if people wanted to do that, I can pass the power. And I will say a technical note is that, Eleta, I think it would have been possible to merge the breakout rooms. So I apologize.
No worries. We were learning tonight, and we did incredibly well. For those of you, I also have to say thank you for those of you who let us practice on you, Rachel and Cindy and Danielle. Oh my goodness, you made this possible.
Y'all did great. Y'all did great.
Thank you, and thank you, Eleta.
Eleta, you're in Ashland, or were you reading off where somebody else was?
I read it, the Kansas City, I read it off the chat.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're in Kansas City, Missouri. We're community health workers that work with patients over on the Kansas City and Missouri side.
Wow, Kansas City, Missouri. Thank you.
And were you the folk who found it through quarantine, desperate?
Correct. Yeah, one of my other coworker that works with me, we're a team at KU Hospital. We found it. She found it through her friend, and so it's word of mouth. And yeah, we're here. We're happy to be here for sure and join in. And appreciate all your knowledge, Eleta. Definitely, this is a topic that needs to be addressed more than just a group chat. It's an everyday type style.
Thank you.
So I'm going to put up our website where you can go and sign up, and we only send out 2 emails a month, like one just saying, hey, our next thing is about 2 weeks before, and then like 2 days before we send out a reminder. So, and we might be doing these online for a while. So, yes. Kansas City, y'all are welcome to come. I'm also going to put up Eleta's website and in this chat, and we'll try to remember to put both of those up on our when we post the recording in the comments underneath, and do that. I don't know. But we'll make sure to put a link to Eleta's website, M.I.N.E Consulting. Do you want to say what M.I.N.E stands for?
Meaningful Interpersonal Necessary Enrichment.
Awesome. That's good. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
Grace, at the beginning, did you tell about next month's, what next month's rethinking is going to be? Did you guys already talk about that?
Yes, and for anyone who may have missed that or doesn't remember, we're planning to have have a radical Portland-based therapist named Karen Hickson, who helped found a great group called Empathy Riot. She's going to be talking about COVID-19 and mental health challenges, managing the anxiety that we're all dealing with, and ways of coping and feeling as empowered as possible with what's going on. So, and she most likely will have another person from Empathy Riot. Empathy Riot is a great group. You can find them on Facebook, or if you just Google Empathy Riot, they're a great group that anyone can follow online. So that will be next group, and it will also be by Zoom the first Wednesday of the month from 7 to 9 Pacific time. And thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for helping make our first Zoom meeting a success. And thank you, Eleta, for a great talk, and everyone for your participation.
Yes, and I have a long ways to go home, so I'm going to sign out. I'm not staying for the after a meeting chat. I'm actually a little bit tired, so I guess I'm going to go to bed early. So good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Good job, rethinking crew.
Yeah.
Yay, thank
Nice
you.
to meet you, Eleta. And all.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Thanks and good night.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Still have a few folks on, so I'm wondering if those are folks who want to chat a little bit.
I'm going to sign off. I have to be up early tomorrow morning, but thank you so much. This was great, and thank you, Eleta, and thank you, everyone for your participation, and Grace for all of your hard work as well. So thank you. Good night.
Thank you for moderating, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you for your moderation and just introducing.
Yes, thanks. This was great. Take care. Good night.
And so much behind the scenes, and she also makes really badass vegan, gluten-free desserts. When we can start gathering together, you'll want to come for some of those.
Yeah, I even found a good recipe, so hopefully that will be sooner rather than later that we'll get to be together again in person. But this was great. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Take care.
Eleta, there's reevaluation counseling in Portland too?
Yes, there is. In fact, there are people in Milwaukee and in Portland. Yeah, there are. Oh, hold on. My battery is running low, it says.
And I'll just say that another way that sometimes people talk about reevaluation counseling is co-counseling.
Correct.
Yes.
So that's also a way to track it down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you wanted to, I'll put the link,
Yeah. So can everybody see in the chat? Is all the links?
Yes.
Here's one for reevaluation counseling. I just put it in.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just rc.org.
Real simple. Oh, and then I'm going to add the one for liberating structures, because that is one of the other Hold on just a moment. I'll get that for you. There's also an app for that. And the book for Liberating actually online. And
oh, wow.
I mean, you can actually, everything that you need is online. I can see myself in the meeting, but I cannot. I'm going to give you this. It's just liberatingstructures.com. If you can type that in, great.
Oh.
Here I am. I lost sight of myself for a moment and didn't think I could add it.
Did I do it right?
Yes. And then the Matrix, that was something I learned back in the 80s through the YWCA.
Yay, YWCA.
Oh, yeah, student Y. Let's be clear.
What did you say?
The student YWCA, which is very different from community YWCAs.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well, the broader one is pretty badass, too. They've been doing
both way different from YMCA.
Yeah.
The YWCA, and I remember calling a community Y, and this is where I first got an inkling of how different they were. I was calling to ask them about their work in the community around their one imperative. The YWCA has had one imperative since the 50s, I think, which is the elimination of racism wherever it exists by any means necessary.
Since the 50s?
Yes, if I'm not mistaken. And when I asked this why, community why, they were like, oh, yes, and it was basically, but you're calling from a student organization, and student organizations take that to a much different length than we do in the community. And I'm like, wow.
I think they might be different, though.
No, they're not. Yes, they are, and no, they're not.
Okay.
And there's gym and swims, yes. As a part of one of the offshoots of the Why Now, it's the same argument.
Okay.
Just different attention. Their focus is different. They're like, you're more political. Okay.